the story I got was my friend Steve Turner had some of my early prototypes, and he showed it to Jeff Hickman. And Jeff Hickman, I guess, responded, this thing looks like it has a little wang on it. And
oh, right.
so
there you go.
So that's how my fly got named. And
what's it called? It's called, is it the wang fly?
It's called the little wang.
Oh, the little wang. That's even better.
Yeah.
Oh man, is there a big wang?
I guess if you tie it in bigger sizes.
That was Todd Hirano sharing the story of how his favorite skater got its name. A little wang to start your day today on the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Hey, how's it going today? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show today. Please head over to Instagram and follow us at Wet Fly Swing. While there, you might as well send a DM or comment if you get a chance. Let me know you're out there listening and checking us out on social. That'd be amazing. Todd Hirano, one of the leaders in the dry line steelhead game, is here to break down all of his good tips and tricks. Todd talks about the best knot to hitch up your fly, why he likes a bi-visible fly, and his process for twitching that same fly on the swing. He's not into the super chug, but has his own little style. Before we get started, let's hear from our sponsor. Koffler Boats specialize in custom-ordered aluminum boats and uses the best materials, components, and accessories available to meet all of your fishing and boating needs. Head over to wetflyswing.com/Koffler to check out the lineup right now. That's Koffler, Koffler, wetflyswing.com/Koffler to check out the lineup and to connect with Joe. Todd's take and a bunch of great resources for the season. So without further ado, here is Todd Hirano from Dryline Steelhead.
How's it going, Todd?
Going great. Thanks for the invite. I'm honored to be on your podcast today.
Yeah, no, this is you're right in line with the little series. I'm probably going to call this a series because I've had Adrian now, Richard, and even gosh, I'm drawing a blank now. I'm thinking of who am I missing on the pay? Your crew out there.
Oh, Bucky.
Yeah, Bucky, exactly. So yeah, well, we'll dig into a little bit of that, but it feels like I got you're part of that, maybe the final leg of that crew. But we're going to dig into a little more on dryline steelhead. Before we get there, maybe you can just start us off and talk about how you first got into fly fishing.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Hawaii, on the island of Kauai, and of course we don't have traditional fly fishing opportunities there. So I became interested in fly fishing from reading magazines like Fishing World and Field and Stream, and saw these articles on catching trout and stuff like that, and so it just piqued my interest, and then I bought some fly fishing gear when we took a trip when I was a kid to Yosemite area, and it was kind of a mismatch fly fishing outfit, so it was kind of a rough start, and then I later on bought another fly fishing outfit through Cabela's, and my grandma at the time had ordered some discount books through a publishing warehouse place, and so I got some literature like McLean's Fly Fishing Encyclopedia, Ray Bergman's Trout, and stuff like that, and so that's how it piqued my interest. Of course, back then, this would have been in the 70s. There was no YouTube videos or anything, so I just tried to learn as best as I could from, just the static illustrations in books, and a little bit of what I'd see on TV every now and then. I remember seeing clips of like Lee Wolf and guys like that on TV every now and then. And so I actually did some experimenting. We have some freshwater ponds there where there's some bass and stuff. So I did a little bit of experimenting without much success, and we actually have a few trout streams on Kauai in the mountains. There's actually some rainbow trout in there, and so I did a little experimentation there. But nothing much happened. I mean, being in an isolated place where I didn't have any in-person mentors, it was tough to kind of really get a grasp of what fly fishing was about. I mean, these days, of course, fly fishing is more popular in Hawaii. You have people chasing bonefish and stuff like that, and there's bass fishing guides on Oahu and all that stuff. But back then, I was definitely like a lone ranger. And then I moved to Oregon in 1988, and it was then, that I actually got to, actually do, put fly fishing into real application. I think I was beginning on the Deschutes River. I was out there with a little 7-foot Fenwick fly rod that I had bought from Cabela's back in the day, and started catching red sides on hares, ear nymphs. Basically, I was doing a wet fly swing with a nymph. I didn't know any better, and was getting into some of those red sides on the Deschutes, and I was just totally hooked. And I was living in the Beaverton area back then, so I frequented places like Larry's Sports Center in Tigard, and the old Kaufman Streamborn store, and so my initiation into fly fishing really began then in the late 80s, and then my interest truly started to veer towards steelhead. After being proficient enough at catching some trout, I started seeing things like those Lonnie Waller videos. Back then, you'd rent videos from a video store, and I rented the 3M series with Lonnie Waller, and so those clips of him catching steelhead on dry flies just really piqued my interest, and then of course frequenting the Kaufman store in Tigard there, I kept seeing Bill McMillan's book Dryline Steelhead on the shelf, and I kept paging through that book every time I go in there, and so yeah, that kind of peak is where my interest in steelhead fly fishing began, basically back in 1989 or so. And then ironically we moved back to Hawaii in 1990, so I was basically a long distance steelheader from that time until we moved back to Oregon in 2009. So I'd be taking trips to Oregon and Washington, and got into my first steelhead on dry flies up on the Bulkley River in 1995, and a trip we took up there then. So, and then getting my initial successes on dry flies for steelhead on that trip in 1995 just really sealed my fate. From that point forward, I've just been just a total nut for catching steelhead on dry flies. So
addicted, yeah. I mean, you've got the website that's probably, I don't know if it's the best resource out there, but it might be. And I mean, when you think of, the dry line steelhead, because steelhead's hard enough for a lot of people, but, you've dug into dry line steelhead, and even the extreme version, like in the wintertime. Why have you dug into that? Why not just stick with catch as many steelhead as possible?
That's a good question. I think as I read, that through that book, Bill McMillan's book, Dryline Steelhead, and reread it multiple times, I think, what I came away with from reading, his articles in that book is steelhead fly fishing is about a lot more than, just going out there and trying to catch as many fish as you possibly can. It's about, the grace of the method that you utilize. That's why Bill McMillan, he stuck to dry lines even in the wintertime, and he just, was ecstatic about catching steelhead on dry flies. And back then, it was kind of a novelty even for him in Southwest Washington at the time. And so his influence, coming away with the idea that, steelhead fly fishing is about more than catching fish. It's about, it's also about, going in with a mindset of self-imposed restraints, because as you said, catching steelhead on a fly is tough enough to begin with. So, why get into utilizing methods that, typically reduce your odds even further? And so it just became, just my own challenge for myself. And I just have get a lot of satisfaction on catching steelhead on dry flies. I do that almost all year long. And then in the wintertime, I do fish wet flies for some part of the winter, but still I'm sticking with a floating line. But just that spirit of self-imposed restraint. I mean, our steelhead resources are limited anyway, so it's probably the lowest impact methods that you can come across. But I acknowledge it's not a mindset for everybody. Because again, with our returns so low, I mean, especially guys who are newer to the sport, they just want to experience the thrill of hooking a fish, a steelhead on fly gear, no matter what it takes. And of course, that's everybody's got to get their initiation into the sport in their own ways.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you mentioned, Lonnie Waller, Bill McMillan, and I mean, even Kaufman's. I mean, three huge names, people, in that space in the past. I think actually, I guess Kaufman's, you don't hear much from him, but I think Randall's still out there somewhere. And but yeah, I mean, as far as, and I would dig into the Willamette River, because I know that's some of your home water, and talk about maybe how you do it up there. But before we get there, can you talk about? I'm curious because it sounds like maybe you are one of the main people in this dry line steelhead, but who else is out there doing kind of, I don't know, similar to what you're doing, sharing, teaching, all that stuff?
Let's see.
I know Adrian. I know I talked to Adrian, like I said, and Richard. I mean, that's your crew. Are there others? Mm-hmm. Is there another website that's out there that's all about dryline steelhead?
Yeah, there's this guy Steve in upstate New York. On Spey Pages, he goes by username Upstate on the Fly, and he has a podcast as well.
Oh, cool.
And he's been intrigued with dryline methods as well, and in the last few years, in his home waters in New York, he's discovered the possibilities of getting steelhead on dry lines in the wintertime, and and dry flies as well. So he's kind of another person who's kind of discovered the thrills of it. But other than that, I'm trying to think who else is out there.
Do you know the name of that podcast?
I think it's Upstate on the Fly is what it's called.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Upstate. Yeah, there it is, Upstate on the Fly. Yeah, I'll put I hate to take people away from this conversation as they're listening, but just for a note, if you want to check it out, yeah, it's Upstate on the Fly, and I'll put a link to it there. I haven't even heard. This is the amazing thing about the podcasting space, is that and I can see it's fairly new. It has just 9 ratings, but it looks awesome. But this is the amazing thing about the podcasting space, is that all these new podcasts are popping on. It's just popping up, and it's just helping. It's really cool. So.
And Bruce, I was just remembering, Bruce Kruk is another one.
Oh, that
is a dryline guy. So
yeah, and I had Bruce on as well. So yeah, I mean, that gives us a little background. It's cool. And you said Kauai, right? That's where you were from.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kauai, which is amazing. I mean, I've been there. I guess once, maybe twice, but yeah, it's definitely an amazing place. Have you been? Is it a spot you go back to, or do you kind of stick in kind of on the West Coast?
I haven't been back home since 2015, so it's been a while. I love Kauai. It's a beautiful little island. Born and raised there. Never saw myself leaving there. But what I realized is there's no steelhead on Kauai, and
yeah.
My living the dream for me is kind of the reverse of what it is for a lot of people. Because a lot of people from the mainland U.S., their dream is to live in Hawaii and go to the beach every day and go surfing and all that stuff. And I'm from there, and my dream is just, I'm living it here, being here where I can fish for steelhead every day of the year if I wanted to. So
yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you've got for sure the passion, that addiction, whatever you want to call it. Maybe we could just take it to the water, and just talk about, because obviously the dry line steelhead, I mean, we're talking summer steelhead, if we want to focus on that here, for somebody maybe that hasn't done a lot of that, or maybe hasn't kind of skated up fish. Can we dig into that a little bit and talk about what it feels like? Maybe just take us to the water. So when you are going out there, what's the, maybe first we're talking about the middle fork of the Willamette or the Willamette? Which area are we talking about?
It's basically one and the same. I mean, the upper Willamette, when you get into Eugene, Springfield area up this way, it's called the upper Willamette. And then The Willamette itself becomes called the middle fork of the Willamette when you get above the confluence of the Coast Fork, which is right down in Eugene. The Coast Fork originates up above Cottage Grove and then comes down. It's a smaller tributary, but for some reason from that point upstream, it's called the middle fork all the way up, past Oak Ridge and everything. So
maybe you could just take us to so we're talking in that area, this is that, I just think of it as the upper Willamette, but yeah, kind of that middle, I guess, area somewhere around, below, above, somewhere in the Springfield, Eugene area. Maybe just take us to water, and what are you doing there preparing for catching a steelhead? Maybe you just first start about, and I know the runs maybe are down a little bit this year, but just in general, if you're going out there, where are you headed? Like what month, what time, and I'll kind of start there.
Sure. Well, on the upper Willamette or middle fork Willamette, the steelhead on good years, you may have decent numbers even as early as May. I mean, a few of them start in March. On good return years, you can have decent possibilities in May. May can be kind of a unpredictable month. It depends on water levels. It's a month where, depending on what the winter was like, you may have a lot of more runoff. So, you may have high flows, which kind of confines you to near shore areas. But like, for instance, this year was kind of a low water year. So, basically we've had summer levels, since April for the most part. But there's the nice thing I like about the upper Willamette is the variety of water. There's a lot of bank access, so there's a little spots if I have just limited amounts of time, there's bank spots that I hit pretty regularly, and there's great stretches that you can float. Basically we're talking about the stretches from Dexter Dam, down through Eugene. So there's good stretches that if you have access to a drift boat or a pontoon, you can do floats as well. And there's just a lot of great classic fly water in that stretch of river. So it's basically just taking a classic looking piece of water, and I like to start as high as possible in the run. That upper section, I come to call it the armpit, where it forms kind of a corner where you have the main current and you have the softer inside cushion. It starts as a narrow band at the top and then typically starts to fan out as you progress down a typical steelhead run. And kind of my process, through my learning curve with that river and with most rivers in general is I tend to fish everything. Everything that swings the fly halfway decent, I'll check it out. And so that's kind of allowed me to learn, where steelhead hole, especially on water that I fish frequently. That I have the luxury of fishing over and over again. You come to by fishing a lot of water, you come to realize, where steelhead hold, especially when you're fishing a dry fly. Not all water's conducive to holding steelhead that'll hit a dry fly, but I've discovered places like, for example, the very tops of some runs where steelhead looked like they almost had to turn sideways to come up and rise to my skater, to places where I would have sworn were too deep for a steelhead to come up for a dry fly. And, I'm raising steelhead in these areas that, many people would think would be more of a salmon hole or something. So you never know.
So you're saying basically in some good years, maybe even early, like March, April, definitely May, if conditions are right, you can hit it. I mean, when would you say is the best, just again, in general, when is the peak? When is it typically you think like this is the most fish would be here?
June and July, pretty much.
Yeah. So June, July. And right now, when we're recording this, we're kind of in that June, July area. So this is kind of a peak. time. So if you take it like right now and we have low water conditions, think about that as you go out there. So, you're finding a run. What's the first thing finding a run? Do you feel like in low water, you're hitting them more in the upper in that armpit than you are in other parts of the run?
Well, the nature of the Willamette, it's not a small river, even up high here. So I'm still, they can be anywhere. They could be up high, in a shallow, riffly part of the run, up high in the corner, or it's still, the river still has the character where they could be anywhere, in a run. And at the current water levels right now, which is considered, summer levels, typical summer levels. When fish are around, I'll find them in various locations in certain runs. And the runs that I fish, a lot of them have kind of structural characteristics where it's not changed from year to year by, high water in winter too much. Like a lot of water on the North Umpqua, for instance. So when fish are around, they'll be in certain spots. You can pretty much tell when there's not many fish around because, number one, you won't find them, or you won't find them in as many different spots. So.
Gotcha. Okay. So basically like we've talked a lot about different types of, reading water and stuff, but find, a run, that looks good, that has maybe some structure, and then pretty much fish it all. Would you, if you take us to the run, let's talk more about, how you entice that fish up, because, you could be swinging flies, wet flies down, and there's different ways to do it. But let's talk about what flies you're using. And then how do you, give a couple tips on how you entice those fish to take a dry fly? Because that's kind of what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so typically, I pretty much fish, especially during this time of year, I'm fishing dry flies almost 100% of the time. And that's just my approach. I just, love the excitement of a surface take, so much that, that's pretty much all I do. The only time I tie a wet fly on this time of year is during what's called the comeback. If you happen to raise a fish and you try to get them to come back on the dry fly and the fish is just not coming back, then I'll go back with a small wet fly. But basically my approach is, I start from the very top of a run. And typically at the top of a run, you're going to be fishing shorter casts. And then as you get to your comfortable length of casting, distance, then you just methodically work down a run. And I just cover all the water that swings the fly well. So that's pretty much, it's kind of oversimplification, but I just
there's not
fish
much to
right through it. Yeah, and generally I'm fishing depending on the characteristic of the run and the speed of the current. When I'm able to, I try to get as broadside of an angle as I can, because I like to cover as much water as possible. And, I like to try and get a little bit of speed in the swing, which kind of, I feel like elicits instinctive or impulsive reaction from a fish that might be holding out there. It also depends on the setup that you're fishing with, in terms of, whether you're fishing a switch rod with a, short scandi head or a longer rod with a longer line. So that makes a difference too. And I'm kind of all over the map with equipment.
You got a lot of rods in there?
Yeah, I'm kind of a equipment hoarder. I've used everything from, old fiberglass Fenwicks, fiberglass rods, single hand fiberglass rods. And recently I acquired a Steve Godshall 16-foot 7-inch 7-weight. So I use everything, from, 8-foot Fenwicks to 16.5-foot 2-handers on the middle fork.
That's it. That's cool. So you're a gear, kind of like me, but I love it because you got a little bit of everything. You got old school stuff and new stuff. What's your, if we take it down to just back to that middle fork fishing, you're out there somewhere around that area, Eugene or whatever. What if you had to say somebody's coming with you and they haven't been out there, what rod should they be taking? Or does it matter?
Probably a good all around rod on this river would probably be 13.5 feet. Would be a good
6 weight or something like that.
6-7 weight. And I just kind of a phase I've been going through over the last few years. I went through the typical scandi shirt line phase. And I go back to those setups, like say a switch rod and a rage line or airflow scandi compact type of setup. In recent years, I've kind of just gone back to little longer lines. The Beulah arrowhead line has been kind of a staple for me, so it's just like an extended scandi head. You get a little bit less stripping, a little more distance. And as funny thing is, my buddies have we've just been raving about that line lately, the Beulah arrowhead, and of course with some of the longer rods I've gotten, I've been using like some other lines too, like Gale Force polizers and the ballistic vector. So yeah, equipment is fun. You can be all over the place, but
yeah, that's right. On that 13-foot 5 or 13.5 6 weight, what line is that? What are you putting on that one?
Let's see. The arrowheads come in all different weights. So, like on a 6 weight, the 6-7 arrowhead, which is like 44 feet long and 450 grains or something like that. If you go up to a 7 weight, it would be the 7-8 arrowhead, which is, let's see, 47 feet at 510 grains. I don't know why I have this stuff memorized, but
that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So basically that's it. And then, so that's the rod and line. So let's go back to the water. And you mentioned a couple of things. I want to follow up on the broadside and speed. So talk about, what do you mean by broadside to the fish? So talk about that. Say if you're in a run, you're fishing, I guess typically you're probably fishing both banks. If you're looking, you're on, say, river left, and you're swinging from right to left down, what would be broadside to a fish?
Yeah, broadside would be, pretty much straight across, like a 90-degree cast. It's kind of like what is described with grease line fishing, but broadside presentations kind of lend themselves more to areas where, the flow is somewhat even and a little bit on the slower, softer side. So in kind of like what Dick Hogan mentioned in his book as well, I mean, the water type basically dictates for me, the angle that I'm fishing, So when let's say, for instance, in the upper part of the run, where the water is moving faster, you typically might be using more of a downstream presentation. And as you get further into the heart of the run, as it softens and widens, my presentations will typically become more broadside.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. So basically the broadside, if you're in a perfect spot for it, like you said, a little bit slower, so you basically know where you think is a fish, or where you've hit one in the past and you see that fish, and if you could drop that fly like by broadside, you mean drop it like right just above it, and then or how are you presenting that fly to it?
Yeah, I guess a bit above the fish, and more across than down. So more of a cross grass person versus downstream.
Gotcha. And that's the fact that you're basically just the profile, I guess. Is it because the profile is more broad to the fish, or why do you think that's better?
So when the fly comes broadside, of course it's coming crosswise to the fish. So the fish sees the sideways profile of the fly. But some of it has to do with speed as well, because when the run softens up, giving more of a broadside cast keeps a bit more speed on the fly.
And what's, again, we talk about reading water. I guess it's interesting because sometimes that's not always easy to do. Like, what is the right speeds? So what would be too fast for this type of broadside, or this type of a swing? Or I guess it's not swing, but when you first cast, is too fast a riffle, or is there runs that are too fast?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when you're starting at the very top of a run, you have the main current pushing in, typically, which is can be pretty fast at the very top. So you're concentrating on the inside corner where the water starts to soften. So, using a broadside presentation there, casting into that fast current is just going to whip your fly around too fast. You're making a smaller angle of a cast there. And what folks who are new to it, I encourage them, not to overthink it too much, because a lot of it is just kind of, an individual getting into their own kind of rhythm and feel for it. So that's what happened for me as well. I just kind of just went for it, and after a while, you kind of get your own feel for how you like to fish a run and what feels good to you. And in some ways, there's no right and wrong. I've had situations like, for instance, on the North Umpqua, I was fishing a spot, and I was trying to get more of a cross and down presentation in a run I was fishing, and I went to lay my cast out, and the wind blew upstream, so it put this big upstream belly in my cast. So my skating fly was just racing, across this faster current, and this steelhead just, literally launched across the surface of the water to grab the fly. So sometimes you never know, and then other times, when water's so slow where your fly is not hardly even moving, and you're thinking, "No, there's nothing going on here," and out of nowhere, steelhead just takes your fly off the surface. So there's no hard fast rules. It's kind of like I encourage guys who are new just to not to overthink stuff.
That's perfect. I love that. And I think that's a great thing. I mean, people right now, again, bring it back to Eugene. If somebody's listening to this and maybe they haven't gone much for steelhead, or maybe they have, but I mean, they could go up and just grab a 9-foot 8-weight or 7-weight, right? With a dry line, and just go do it just as easy. Maybe not just as easy, but does that ever happen out there? Or is it pretty much, because you mentioned you have the single head rods. I mean, how often do you see a guy with the single head rod out there?
Not too often. Mostly it's trout fishermen, that are using single handers. But I've got, steelhead on, trout class single handers, all the way down to like 9-foot 4-weights. And,
oh, you've caught steelhead you mean like fishing for trout, or specifically for steelhead?
Using trout gear for steelhead. And I get a lot of flack for that, but, it's a matter of how you fight the steelhead. So I'm not encouraging folks to use a 9-foot 4-weight with like 6X tippet or something like that. When I do use lighter gear, I'm always using my typical, 10-pound maxima, and fighting steelhead aggressively. So, like I caught winter steelhead a few years ago on a 11-foot 3-weight trout spey, Cabela's trout spey, and I mean I had that fish on the bank in like 5 minutes. Because I'm still using, stout tippet and, using the bottom of the rod and literally pointing straight at the fish and just putting a lot of pressure on the fish and getting them in quickly. So light gear does not mean, toying with a steelhead, because, our wild steelhead, of course, are too precious.
That's right. Yeah, get them in. What's the temp on the middle front? I'm just curious, like how... I mean, is that anything to think about as far as in the summer, right? Things, especially like right now, things are going to be 100. I just saw yesterday they were talking about 115.
Yeah. It can get up over 70 degrees at times. And I've been watching the temperatures on the Willamette now. I think we're getting into the mid 60s in the heat of the day. So this time of year, I'd be fishing primarily in the morning. Being that I live right 10 minutes away from a lot of spots I fish, I have the luxury of, being able to run out at first light, and fish some water until it starts to get bright and hot, and just run back home to my air conditioned house. But
oh man, yeah, you got the life. 10 minutes away from your home water, steelhead.
Yeah. But we're looking like we're shaping up to have a pretty low number year. It's looking similar to 2017. Looking like 2017, which is like the lowest return year I've experienced since I've been here. I've been fishing the Willamette. I moved back to Oregon in 2009, so fishing this stretch of river consistently, since then. And 2017 was a pretty low point. So.
Yeah, that's right. When you fish, when you see these different numbers, do you fish the water differently, or are you still just starting at the top and fishing?
Yeah, I pretty much am doing the same thing. In fact, when you got low numbers, I mean, you have to cover more water. I mean, because places where you have found fish before, they may not be there, so you got to cover as many spots, where they might be as possible. So again, it's a mindset as well of going and realizing that the odds are small, and the upside, if anything, with low return, you're just there's fewer fishermen out there.
Yeah, no, it's good. I was just thinking, I've got this. You don't talk about meditation a lot, but I have this new app. It's for meditation. I haven't really done much meditating, but my counselor, whatever, it was kind of like, okay, try this thing out. And but what do you think? I mean, when you're out there in the run, is that what it is for you? Because if you go for, I'm not sure how many days you're going without touching a fish, but is it more a meditative thing, or is there something else for you?
Yeah, I think so. Because I'm out there, and it's about having, I call it the new normal of low expectations, in the world we live in right now with Steelhead. But it's a matter of finding contentment regardless of what the river gives you. Taking things on nature's terms and finding contentment, regardless. And that could be part of the reason why I'm always into new gear, because it gives me an excuse to get out and get more casting practice, get dialed into this latest rod and line that I got, or whatever it is. But it's just kind of this patient acceptance of being content with what the river provides you, and enjoying yourself when you're out there, regardless of whether you're catching fish all the time or not.
Yeah, exactly. You're still you're doing it. You're out better on the river than in the office, right? Or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. It reminds me of John Shewey. We had him on. He was way back, I guess, is episode 16, I think, somewhere in there. But yeah, he's up there too, right? And he said the same thing. He's got his little spot. Do you ever see Shewey out there on the water?
I haven't. He lives here in Eugene, Springfield area.
He's somewhere. I'm not sure if I think he might be, gosh, I don't even remember exactly. He's somewhere. He's closer to you than he is to Portland. Okay. And he fishes. Yeah. You know what? I think it's this, I think it's the North Sea NEM. I think that's his.
Oh, so he might be up in Salem area then.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think he is up in Salem. Yeah, that's right. So he's a little bit, I guess, downriver, right? From you, or I guess a little bit lower.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe we just quickly, we talked about the rod. We talked about a little bit on the swinging, but what about the leader? I mean, this is usually pretty straightforward, but what are you using there? You talked about 10-pound tippet. Are you just running a straight 10-pound leader, and how long, or what are you doing there?
I'm typically running about a 12 to 14 foot leader. And again, I use Maxima or big game tapering from 40 pound for the butt section, and typically tapering down to 10-pound Maxima.
Oh, to 10 pounds. So yeah, you're kind of going like 40, like 12 inch sections of each, 40, whatever, 20, 15, 10, something like that.
Yeah, I have a formula on my blog. I have a story on surface steelhead tips on my blog. But, for instance, a typical leader formula for me would be like 4 feet of 40, 3 feet of 30, maybe 2 feet of 25, a foot of 20, a foot of 15. And then I put a tiny swivel in there too, because the surface flies I fish, they tend to spin sometimes on the cat. So I found this brand of swivel called S-Pro swivels from my local Cabela store. I get the smallest ones I can get. They're like size 10s or something like that.
That's S-Pearl?
S-Pro, S-P-R-O.
Oh, S-Pro, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, good. So that's it. And then, so that's a fairly long, like, you're 11, 12 feet, something like that.
Yeah. Well, it ends up being between 12 and 14 feet. Using up about 3 feet of tippet typically.
Yeah. 3 feet of tippet. Okay. So that's pretty much 12, 14 feet. And is that kind of a standard throughout the whole summer season? You're kind of in that range.
Yeah. That's typically what I use.
And now let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. Koffler Boats specialize in custom-ordered aluminum boats and uses the best materials, components, and accessories available to meet all of your fishing and boating needs. The Jet Drifter, a perfect powerboat for shallow water rivers or lakes, will perform with as little as a 35 horsepower prop engine, but the whole design will also accept larger engines. In addition, the Jet Drifter is also designed to be rowed. The Jet Drifter can be custom built in 14-foot through 18-foot lengths. And I've been rowing Koffler drift boats for most of my life. I remember going down the river in my dad's Koffler boat when I was a kid. And since I have transitioned into the 17 by 54 drift boat, perfect for packing a ton of gear and still staying nimble. If you need a bulletproof boat that can literally sit outside all year long when not in use and take a beating, Koffler has the boat for you. Whether a jet drifter, drift boat, Rocky Mountain trout boat, or sled, Koffler has you covered. Head over to wetflyswing.com/Koffler to connect with Joe and the family today. That's Koffler, Koffler, right now. wetflyswing.com/Koffler. You support our podcast by clicking over through that link to connect with Joe. Please let Joe know you heard of the ad through the podcast when you connect, and check back with me to celebrate if you end up making a purchase. Now let's get back to the rest of the show.
About on, just on flies. I know you have a couple of your own flies. I think it was one of them, the Wang or something like that.
Yeah. It's so basically it has a moose hair and flash for the tail, and a bright colored butt with floss body, and then cactus chenille for the abdomen, and then it has like a cow elk wing that's split with a lip of foam, and then I have these weird foam posts sticking up the top for visibility, and that's how the fly got my name. I guess the story I got was my friend Steve Turner had some of my early prototypes, and he showed it to Jeff Hickman, and Jeff Hickman, I guess, responded, this thing looks like it has a little wang on it, and
oh right.
so
there you go.
So that's how my fly got named. And
what's it called? It's called is it the Wang fly?
It's called the Little Wang.
Oh, the Little Wang. That's even better.
Yeah.
Oh man, is there a big Wang?
I guess if you tie it in bigger sizes.
Yeah, there you go. And so you like the little Wang better.
Yeah, and the name stuck, whether I liked it or not. So it's
nice. Well, I've called out Hickman again here. He's we talked a while back. We talked about coming on, but I think hopefully we'll get him on. We could kind of hear some of these stories from his end, because there's been a few of them out there. Okay, so that's one fly. Is there another one you would throw out there or do you pretty much, is that one good year round?
I use that fly. You can use that fly if you're crazy enough to fish it in the wintertime. I've caught a few winter steelhead on it as well. And then in recent years, in late 2019, I developed my own variation of a bomber, and I call it the bivisi bomber. I always kind of go for a bivisible effect if I can on my patterns, where you have a bright part of the fly as well as a dark part of the fly that can be visible on the surface, because depending on the lighting and the glare on the water, you might see a bright post better versus a dark post. So basically, the bomber variant I came up with in 2019 is like a stubby split wing bomber, and I've taken cow elk, a bunch of cow elk, and just crammed it, right behind the split wings in the front and the deer hair body. So it causes, the stubs of the cow elk to push forward, and the rest of the elk hair just, kind of almost stand fairly straight up. So that creates visibility as well. And you have the contrasting colors with the split wings in the front, which can be calf tail or squirrel tail.
Gotcha. So yeah, and I'm thinking, so on that cow, you mentioned cow elk a couple times. Are you talking, basically different from a bull elk? Can you, if you're picking up this material, can you differentiate that?
Yeah. Back in the day, again, going back to the days when I used to frequent the Kaufman Streamborn store in Tigard. It's back when John Hazel was working there way back then.
Yeah.
This would have been around 1989 when I first got into tying flies, and I was looking to tie yellow stimulators, and the typical recipe for a yellow stimulator calls for deer hair. But John was helping me that day, and he hands me a patch of cow elk. And, I was like, oh, but the recipe says deer, and he goes, oh, believe me, this is what you want. This floats better than deer. And, so I followed his advice, and sure enough, I found that cow elk is the best floating hair that you can use. It's coarse, it's stiff, and it's hollow. So it holds its shape, better than other kinds of hair. So that's why, I use cow elk both on the little wang and the bivisit bomber, just because of the stiffness and the flotation that it provides. And
that's it.
Yeah. And the best source I found for cow elk, best quality I found is by that company, Nature's Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
My local fly shop, the Caddis Fly, carries a good selection of it. But there's other resources as well. But it truly does make a difference. If you're looking at other kinds of elk versus cow elk. Cow elk for me just has that floatability and stiffness advantage.
Yep, exactly. Okay, and on the and I'm just going back to the bomber. That fly is basically a couple of like calf tail tufts sticking out, kind of as the waking, I guess, your tail, and then the waking piece, and then it's elk wrapped, trimmed with a hackle. So that's kind of the bomber. And then describe in your fly again. What was the name of your bomber variation?
I call it the Bivisi bomber.
Oh, Bivisi. So yeah. So how is yours? So you have another color on there. Explain again.
Yeah, so typically, if the elk wing is bright, I may use black calf tail to give contrast. And if the elk wing is dark, black, say, I'll use white calf tail, just so that, depending on lighting, if you have, like, for instance, in early morning and evening time, when light is low, you kind of have that silvery glare on the water, so a black wing will, just pop against that glare. And then when you get a little bit of light on the water, then the bright calf tail will just pop, so.
Describe that a little bit when that fly is swinging down, and you get that eat, or that take or whatever. What does that look, what is that looking like, feeling like? And then also talk about, are you getting multiple takes in this thing, or is it usually one hammer?
That's part of the big part of the thrill, Dave, is you never know what you're going to get. With surface steelhead attacks, it can be just a subtle gulp, kind of like a magnified, trout gulp eating a trico or something like that. Or other times, there's times where the take is just barely detectable, and other times there's just a huge explosion. The fish just explodes on the fly. You just see this big eruption on the water. Sometimes you see, you see the fish launch itself out of the surface to grab the fly. I've even heard stories. My buddy Craig Coover had a steelhead, leap out of the water and take the wang on the way down.
Oh, amazing! So, that's the best. Well, I can't even say that's the best because I'm not sure if that's ever even happened to me, but that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's just the pure excitement of why I do it. Just the unpredictability. You never know what you're going to get. And again, as you mentioned about whether it's just a one-time attack or multiple times, that varies as well. You'll have individual steelhead, where they'll rise after your fly, you know, they'll make an attack at your fly, and if they miss, they're not coming back. You know, they're one and done. And then some of the most fun encounters you can have with a dry fly is those steelhead that keep coming back. And to me, those are the most fun, the players, you know, because sometimes it seems like they're deliberately messing with you. You know, you'll see your fly coming across and you'll see this big bulge, you know, like a foot behind the fly. So obviously, you know, that's a steelhead. And then it'll come and you'll see the fish actually try to take the fly and miss it. And, you know, sometimes you get these rises, you know, 2-3 rises on the same swing. And then, you know, you'll cast out again and, you know, the fish will do the same thing, you know, and your heart's just racing at that point and you're just trying to hold yourself together.
When you're getting those takes with wet flies, you know, you can get that same sort of thing where you're feeling it, but you're not necessarily seeing them as much. So are you seeing these fish coming up and actually seeing their mouth when they're tapping it?
Sometimes, you know, sometimes you just see the water part and you just see a big explosion or a big bulge of water at the fly or right behind the fly.
So are you getting some of those, are you feeling some like actual tips and taps and touches and stuff like that? Or is it more you're seeing the action?
A lot of times I'm just seeing the action. Every now and then, you know, you'll feel a slight pull on the line where, you know, the fish has actually tried to mouth the fly, you know, which brings me to another point is like, you know, I know it can be tough, but the best thing an angler can do is absolutely nothing. You know, when you're seeing these fish, you know, come up after your fly, the worst thing you can do is a Bass Pro hook set and scare the fish and pull the fly away from the fish. You know, so I remember in my early days of fishing dry flies and, you know, reading Bill McMillan's book, I mean, the mantra in my head was, you know, just do nothing, which can be difficult to do. But if you're able to, you know, hold yourself together and do nothing, you know, it allows the fish, you know, to keep coming back after the fly.
Yeah. Gosh. So you come down. So you're in a run, you know, you're swinging down and you see almost a boil or something on the fly. So on that next cast, what are you doing if you don't hook up?
I make the same cast with the same fly until the fish, you know, stops coming back. There's a fair number of times where, you know, on the very next cast, you know, the fish will kind of more definitively eat the fly and you're off to the races with that fish. But other times, you know, the fish will just keep coming back. And sometimes it's almost as if they're deliberately messing with you, you know, where they're obviously coming up short behind the fly. And other times, I've had other times where I'm watching my fly, especially on softer water. I watch my fly come across and I see the fish come up and my fly disappears. You know, the fish comes up, takes the fly, and I'm waiting for the fish to turn. And then the fly just bobs back to the surface and continues swinging across. And so you have a variety of scenarios that can play out. But basically, you know, I just keep making the same cast with the same fly until that fish stops coming back. And then I'll just kind of take a breath at that point, strip my line in, and then I'll change to another fly. Typically, I'll go smaller. I will try to still get a steelhead on the surface, but with a smaller fly. So, you know, I may go to a smaller bomb or a smaller wang or something. And I'll make every effort on comeback, you know, attempts to get that fish on the surface. And sometimes what's worked is I've actually, you know, gone through 3 or 4 fly changes and I'll go back to the fly that the steelhead originally came up to. And he decides he finally wants to eat the fly he originally rose to.
Oh, wow. What's the most activity you've had on one fish, on one run?
I recall one fish in particular. I was high in a run on the Willamette, and this fish, you know, just kind of boiled at my fly on the dangle and missed it. And, I didn't have any swing left. So what I did was I kind of just swayed my rod back outwards so the fly would swing back outwards a little bit. Kind of this fanning kind of swing. And that fish literally, came up to my fly like 10 or 12 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was one of those fish, obviously I knew he was there, so I was able to drop my rod and give him slack. And, so I had every opportunity to try and hook him. But for some reason, I don't know, his mouth was Teflon or something. But
that's amazing.
Yeah, I've had other fish where, you can raise them, 7, 8, 9 times until they either just stop coming back, because they're onto what you're doing, or you actually hook them, So
first of all, I guess first on this, what knot are you using to tie your flies on?
I think most often I'm using, what's called a garrote hitch. And Bill McMillan, I actually saw an article Bill wrote in Amato's Fly Fishing magazine in the mid-90s when he was doing dry line seminars with Little Creek Outfitters on the Grand Ronde back at the time. This was before Marty and Mia bought it, of course.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And so he was using what he called a garrote hitch, and it was named after
How do you spell that?
I think it's Garoute.
Oh yeah, TT. Yeah, I think Richard. I think on the Richard podcast we had, I think he mentioned this as well. I'm glad you're reminding us.
Yeah, and it's named after this guy, Mike Garoute from Elgin. And Bill had met Mike at the time, and Mike Garoute showed him this knot. And basically what it is, it's a double turtle knot where you come in reverse orientation. So on a down-eyed hook, you're putting the leader in from the bottom of the hook. So and tying the turtle knot, like you normally would. But what happens is you have the leader coming out at a sharp angle down.
Yeah.
And so
that's right. So
it gives the effect of using a riffle hitch, but without, the downside of, riffle hitch can kind of do some wear and tear on your fly, when from tying the hitch down. And if you hook a fish, you might pull the front part of your fly apart,
Yeah, that's right. So that's the key here. So basically, it's doing the same thing as a riffle hitch. And the idea here most of the time is that you want that fly to create a pretty good kind of a messy wake. Or describe what the fly looks like when it's coming across.
It's just coming across, making a V wake as it comes across. And for me, with the wang, I tend to, use some twitches during the swing as well. The twitching swing, which is popular in the North Umpqua, which was, popularized by guys like Tony Ratney and Mark Stangeland and all of them. But I don't tend to do like aggressive kinds of twitches. Some guys may have seen that video, kind of a big deal with.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I can't remember it either.
Yeah, where it's kind of they do more of a chugging kind of twitch, and
chugging.
Yeah, I kind of do more of just a gentle pulsating kind of twitch if I add action to the fly. So when I'm fishing the wang, I use the twitches more. With the bomber, because it's more of a natural pattern. I don't know, for some reason I don't twitch it as much, but you can, of course, use the twitch on it.
How do you, Mike? Can you spell his last name?
Stangeland.
Yeah. How do you know how to spell that?
Yeah, Stangeland.
Oh, okay. Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so the gentle twitch is just almost like a light, like wrist twitch, or is that, or are you doing it more with your? Is it? So it's not with the line at all. You're using just your rod to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just adding a little bit of movement on the fly, just to kind of differentiate it from the currents on the water. That's the way I think of it. It's just a way of kind of allowing the steelhead
stick out.
Yeah.
Stick out. So take us back. So we're on that fish. So this fish has it's hit it a couple times, but it hasn't taken. You've switched multiple times to a different dry flies, and still no hookups. Maybe it's popped it again, and then are you eventually going to wet flies, trying to go down to that level, or to take us there before you walk away, before you move? Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, going back with a small wet fly right in the film is kind of like my last resort. just because I love seeing the fish come back to the surface. But, it's a thrill to get them on the comeback wet fly as well, because that fish is there.
Have you ever tried like changing, say maybe you take a step up and come back down, or change your line length, or take a step down? Are you still trying to find that fish, or do you feel like you're in the spot where it's going to hit and then that's kind of it?
Yeah, I have tried like shortening up, like pulling a couple strips of line in and working my way back down to the fish, but standing in the same position. And sometimes that has worked. Sometimes trying to get, again, more of a broadside angle if I can, sometimes that's helped. And sometimes, if I've raised the fish several times and the fish has just stopped coming back no matter what I do, I'll just continue down the run. If I'm not at the very bottom of the run by then, I'll just continue fishing through, and then I'll come back up into the run and fish down to that fish again. The fish having had an opportunity to rest, sometimes that fish will come back.
That's right. You give it a good hour between or something like that.
Yeah. Or even different time of the day. Let's say you raise the fish in a certain spot in during your early morning session, and if you get back out in the evening time, it's like you kind of are keyed in. Okay, that fish was 2/3 of the way down the run, right next to that certain texture of water that you see out there. So it's fun, you have that anticipation of knowing that a fish may still be there. So
yeah, that's awesome. So basically you're out there, you're covering it, you're going back and then you're covering again, there's a fish there. It's probably not moving, it's probably hanging, right? If you're catching them, do you find these fish? I guess standard thinking, you go back the next morning, there's new fish in there, but what's your take on that? Are you pretty standard staying on a few runs, or are you covering a bunch of runs during the summer?
Let's see. On my local water, there's a couple runs that I fish, more than others, just because of the convenience factor and time factor. Oftentimes, I'm fishing for an hour and a half before I start work in the morning or something like that. So, I'm kind of having to have a game plan of, I have enough time to fish this run and that run. And, but of course, if I have more time, I'll cover more water and cover different runs. So
before we get out of here, I wanted to just touch on your website because it is a good resource. And so if somebody's coming on, we've talked about some stuff today, haven't covered everything, but maybe help somebody get a feel for how you do it out there. Where would you, if they go to your website, how do they take this conversation even further to help with some of these summer fish? Do you have a recommendation, or do you just start reading from the top and go from there?
Yeah, they can just start reading from the top. I highlighted, I have a step-by-step for the little wang fly that I think people have referenced quite a bit. So that's kind of
okay,
bookmarked in a way, so people can get on that. And I have an article called Surface Steelhead Tips, and it's an article that also got published in Swing the Fly magazine as well. So I kind of, in that article, I kind of summarize a lot of what we've talked about here and illustrated.
Oh, good. So, when was that? What do you know when that came out?
When it came out in Swing the Fly.
Yeah, if somebody wanted to track that down, I'm not sure if they can get it online or where they would go.
Yeah, it was in one of the printed copies. I think it would have been probably 4 years ago by now.
Okay, I'll maybe ask. I'll check in with the editor and see if because that sounds like that'd be a good thing. And I'm not sure. Do they have all their stuff online?
I think they do at this point.
Yeah, at this point, yeah. So that'll be good. So I can hopefully put a link to that and.
Yeah,
I might. So that'd be good. Okay.
And I'm glad to talk to people directly as well, so folks can connect with me through my Instagram account.
Yeah. Okay. Through Instagram. And is that just Todd Hirano?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you spell that just for everybody?
First name Todd, Todd. Last name Hirano, Hirano.
Okay, yeah, and also if you type in dryline steelhead, it's your website comes up, and probably I'll bet you McMillan's book is probably down there in the top page too, right on Amazon. if you wanted to pick that. But where would you recommend if somebody wanted to pick up that book, McMillan's history, that book, where would they go?
I think you can look on Amazon. I mean, obviously that book's been out of print for quite a while, so these are all going to be used copies. And depending on demand at any given time, the prices will reflect that accordingly. There was a period of time where there was such a high demand. I think people were paying like $1,000 for copies.
Oh, wow.
But there's a couple other booksellers that may have used copies as well. I forget which ones they were. Some folks had mentioned to me.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm seeing $500 for the hardcover right now. I'll put if I can, in the show notes that, we'll have just hopefully a good, easy chance to get a copy of that. What else, as far as resources, anything else you want to throw out there? You got that's obviously probably the best book, your website. Anything else that isn't, maybe that you would recommend?
I don't know. I frequent the spey pages forum a lot. Still, I've been on there since like 2008 or something. And spey pages is also a great community and great store of information as well. So
okay, perfect. And just back to your website, because I don't want to miss that, because there are a lot of things. So you think, if somebody wants to just start reading from the top, do you, as far as what digging into this, that's probably just the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, and grabbing that Surface Steelhead Tips article within my blog would probably be, kind of a good overview. I'll try to bookmark it on there too. I have the step-by-step for the Little Wang. I also was calling it the Purely Functional Skater at the time because I didn't have another name for it. But yeah.
All right, good. Okay, well, I'll let people dig around there and go from there. So, and let's just take it out. We were kind of the 222. We kind of talked about a couple of things, but what about and you've there's been a ton of tips we've had here. Anything else you want to leave somebody with? A couple of tips to help them, maybe find that first summer steelhead on the dry.
Sure. It is a mindset. It's a game of persistence. So, just pick a surface fly that you like, you have confidence in, stick with it, just keep it on your line and just dedicate yourself to learning, and just hit all kinds of water. Just have confidence and enjoy the learning curve and enjoy the journey.
What do you, as far as the, if you're out there, one of those times when you're maybe not catching a lot of fish, what's that? Take us there for a moment. So again, we talked about what it was like for these fish that are hitting it 7-8 times and you're on fire. What about when you're going days? I'm not sure how long you might go between fish, or whatever. I mean, probably longer, but what's that feel like? You're on the water. What are you thinking about? How are you feeling when that's going on? Like, this is probably a good example, right? This year, it's going to be a tough
yeah.
one.
Yeah. Well, I didn't land a single steelhead on a dry fly in 2020. Last year, I hooked into several and I didn't land any. So it was a pretty lean year. But again, just that continuing sense of contentment and appreciation for just being out on the river, whatever, no matter what the rivers provide, just maintaining a sense of contentment and optimism. And just, it's swinging for steelhead with dry flies is something that's worth doing for its own sake, no matter what the outcome is. So
maybe we could just give you, just curious on what rod reel line you use. Can you just talk, if you're going out today, or we didn't talk about reels much. What's your setup look like?
My latest thing is that 16 foot 7-inch quantum 7-weight rod that I got that was made by Steve Godshall. Steve Godshall is legendary with custom rods. I happened upon a good deal on this rod. So I've been playing with that rod and a 660 grain like ballistic vector XL line. So that's what I've been playing with lately. So that's kind of on the extreme long end, but my other favorite outfit is a 13-foot 3-inch Winston B2X 7-weight. It's just such a classic rod that I just love so much, and I'm a sucker for Hardy Perfects. So I have a couple pre-war 3 3/4 and some modern Perfects as well. So
yeah, that's right. You got the good stuff.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. Are you between the two rods, 16 foot, 13 foot, how much do you, it seems like that would be a tough switching between the two as far as casting. Are you pretty much at the upper level that you could cast anything?
I've been spey casting since 1995. I'm not like an expert, but using two-handed rods for that length of time, it has allowed me to be able to adapt. Between whether I'm fishing on the 11-foot 3-weight trout spey or that 16.5-foot two-hander. So,
what's a good general spey casting tip for somebody who still maybe struggles? Maybe they haven't got out there enough. And is there anything just generally you throw out there?
I think paying attention to your anchor placement and lining up your forward cast with your anchor. And the other thing, of course, spending time just practicing. Not while you're fishing, but just dedicating. Especially when you're learning to practice. There's a lot of good instructors out there. There's a lot of great YouTube, clips that you can watch and just over and over again. And
if you think of somebody on maybe YouTube or just out there who's an expert you followed casting for the spey cast, who is that?
Bruce Kruk has been. He's had some short, instructional videos on his Facebook page and stuff, and just even those short clips that he had, just were really helpful, to me, even though I've been casting for, spey casting for like 25 plus years at this point, but he has a great way of explaining things. But back in my time, let's see, I was using Derek Brown's spey casting video, but any good spey casting video. Deck Hogan has a DVD as well. It's been out there for a while, but just whatever you can get your hands on that allows you to watch, with repetition, and just so you're able to soak up the mechanics of the cast. And again, just pure spending time practicing is important too.
That's right. Awesome. Yeah, those are some killer additional resources. And Bruce, I'll put links to that. He was on the podcast as well. And Deck, we had Deck way back. We actually didn't dig. I need to get him back on to talk more about some of this stuff because it's, we could talk all day about this. So Todd, just give us 2 quick ones before we get out here. This is like the music, rapid fire music and podcast. Do you have a podcast you listen to? It doesn't, fly fishing or anything in general?
Yeah, I listened to Rick Harrington's River Ramble podcast. I was catching John McMillan's podcast as well, his OP podcast.
Yeah, I know. I was disappointed that they phased that out.
Yeah,
they had. I'm not sure if you heard what happened there, but Chad, who is kind of the mastermind behind that podcast, he left. I think he moved to Arizona. So he's out of the loop, and he was the mastermind. So basically, and I think John said this. I think John was also really busy. I think that's the thing with him. But yeah, that's a bummer. Maybe somebody else will pick it up because I know the NorCal Barbless guys they're coming back and going on it.
Yeah. Well, I was enjoying it while it lasted.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we had John on too a while back, and he was the one person we mentioned, Bill, I haven't had on yet. I think it'd be interesting to hear from him. I mean, if I had Bill on the show, what would be a question you'd ask Bill or you'd have for Bill? Or do you know this guy so well that you've already?
I don't know. Like I guess just in recent communication I had with him, what really stuck with me is even through the difficult downturns we're going through right now. I mean, he remains continually optimistic. He's also optimistic that it's a cycle that will come out from. Back in the early 90s, I think we had a downturn as well. And he's like, just reminds me of how resilient Steelhead are. So.
Yeah, and I love you said that because that's, John McMillan, he did a whole segment on kind of a little bit of the status history. And that was his takeaway too. It doesn't surprise me that Bill, obviously his dad's been a big influence on John as well. And yeah, that's what he said. He said, man, we're at that point and just, you got to weather the storm and hope everything we're doing is going to help them. Yeah. Stay above that line. So
absolutely. Yeah. And Bill's just a great man. I mean, he's such a humble man. And I've just, treasured my friendship with him. So.
That's great. And what about music? Do you have leave us off on a song, a band, or a type of music you like?
I'm kind of a classic hard rock guy historically. I mean, so
yeah.
You know,
what do you got? Give us something.
I've been into like AC/DC and all that stuff. In recent times, I still play drums. I'm still a drummer, so I'm more.
Oh, right.
More currently, I play drums at our praise team at our local church. So that's kind of what.
Oh, cool.
So contemporary Christian music these days is.
There you go. That's it. Yeah, and I remember hearing about the music a little bit. So if you had to break out one AC/DC song, what would it be right now? Give us you have a name of one?
A lot of their songs are kind of in stark.
They are. Yeah. You shook me all night long.
Yeah, that's a good one. There you go.
You shook me all night long. Yeah, it's the start of that one is pretty amazing. So I'll put a link out to the video so everybody can take a look at that. I'm going to do it as well. That's a great thing. We got a Spotify channel now at wetflyswing.com/music, and it has a song from each of our guests. So you'll have one for AC/DC on there for you. You can check out.
Sounds good.
All right, Todd. Well, give us the last thing heading out of here in the next year or whatever. Anything new coming from you? I mean, what's your plan here? Are you going to stick? I guess you got summer Steelhead now. What does your year look like? Do you have anything big? Do you do the big trips? Or you like the BC? I guess has been off because of COVID, right?
Yeah. We've kind of Adrian and Steve Turner and myself. We've kind of tried to do a BC trip in the fall. We don't have one planned this year. Because of COVID, but hopefully next year, we'll start getting back into putting plans together for BC, and typically, late September, early October, at that time frame. So,
yeah. Have you done BC in the fall every year, like the last number of years?
Yeah, there was a stretch of time, like 2014 on, we were making it there pretty consistently, and then. There were a few years where we missed just due to, stuff going on with our families and stuff. But yeah, it's great to get up there. I mean, that's basically dry fly heaven for me. So
on BC, I'm curious because we occasionally talk about BC. I've been up there but I haven't been up there recently. Can you talk about, since you've been up there every year, what was until COVID? What was that like? Did you see consistently increasing numbers of people? Was that an issue? Could you still find places to be on your own?
You're still able to, make a do-it-yourself trip up there. On the Bulkley, you can make a do-it-yourself trip, just basing yourself out of Smithers, and there's drive-up spots you can get to. Of course, there's guides over there, and you can, bring a boat and put boats in as well. So the Bulkley is one of the rivers where you can, make a do-it-yourself trip out of. The Copper's another one.
Yeah, the Copper. Yeah, that's right. There's a bunch of good. And do you guys ever you got the main. I mean, there's a ton of water. So, okay, yeah, I'm just curious about that. It sounds like so you can still, even though pressure is increased, and is it, if you're coming from the U.S. too, you can only fish weekdays, right? Is that how it still works?
Yeah, Monday through Fridays, and let's see, I think on some rivers Fridays is off limits too. I think on Copper Fridays is off limits.
Are you up there for a couple weeks usually?
No, we've just been planning a 1 week trip, so we fish Monday through Friday. We typically, we've been driving up there, so for me, coming from Springfield, Oregon, it's like over 20 hours total in driving. So we kind of had a system where we, would make driving shifts or we'd spend the night, somewhere halfway between here and there.
So you're going to fish. So say Monday morning you can fish. So you're leaving, are you leaving like Friday night, or what are you doing Saturday?
Saturday morning typically gets us there.
Oh, Saturday morning. Yeah. So you leave Saturday morning.
Yeah. And on the other end, leaving on Saturday morning gets us back, Sunday sometimes. So.
That's right. So leave Saturday morning, so you get there, so you have Sunday to get prepped, and then you're ready, and then you're pretty much, your runs. You're trying to like beat the, be the first one. Are you getting out there at like 4 a.m?
No, not necessarily. We've been taking pontoons up there, so I mean Yeah, we want to make sure we get there when there's enough light to do things safely. So we don't get there get to the water super early in the morning, and we don't take out super late as well. You want to make sure it's light enough where you can see where you're going and stuff. So
that's right. Have you guys ever had any crazy journeys or stories from? I know when we were up there, we had a crazy wolf story. Anything cool happen like that, or probably a few things?
No, I mean, it's just been really nice. I mean, you see a lot of wildlife over there. You know, we've seen moose, elk, bears and stuff. So eagles. It's just a beautiful, unspoiled place to be.
Perfect. Well, I'll send people to, I guess it's either like Todd Hirano, blogspot.com, or just search for Dryline Steelhead, right? That'll get people there. And I'll put a link in the show notes so they can head out directly.
Sure. Sounds good.
All right, Todd. Hey, thanks for all the time today. This has been fun, and I think we dug in pretty well to summer. I don't think I talked with Adrian or Richard as much about, focused on summer fish. So do you think, does it feel like we covered it well enough today?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, Todd. Hey, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes, all links, and everything else we cover today, head over to wetflyswing.com/239. 239. If you get a chance, please subscribe to this show on your app of choice. Just click down below, click the subscribe button. You'll get updated when that next episode drops. And I think I may have been a little off on the last one mentioning Larry Dahlberg, but he is definitely coming on this Tuesday. So 1 week from now, we got Larry Dahlberg on to break down the Dahlberg diver and some of the other good stuff. It was a fun episode coming up here with Larry. That's all I have for you today. I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon. Hope to maybe see you on the river or online.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.